The morning I drove back from my attorney's office, I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. 67 years old, sitting in a Ford F-150 that still smelled like my late wife's vanilla air freshener. And I thought, how did it come to this? I should back up. My name is Lester. I spent 31 years teaching high school history in Dayton, Ohio. Not glamorous work, but honest work. I retired at 63, collected my pension, and figured I'd spend my remaining years the way I'd always wanted. Fishing at the lake house, reading, maybe finally building that woodworking shop in the garage. My wife Carol had the same plans. We used to talk about it at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings, coffee going, no alarm set. She called it our slow chapter. Carol passed 18 months before any of this started. Ovarian cancer. 7 months from diagnosis to the end. I won't dwell on it here because it still cuts the same way it did on day one. And I don't think that ever changes when you lose someone after 40 years. What I will say is this: grief makes you stupid. Not permanently, not completely, but for a window of time, it clouds your judgment in ways you don't even recognize until later. You trust people you normally wouldn't. You say yes when you should say, let me think about it. You confuse attention for love because loneliness at that age is its own kind of pain. My daughter, Renee, she was 39 when all this began, started calling more after her mother died. At first, every few days, then every day. Then she and her husband, a man named Clint, started driving up from Columbus on weekends. I thought it was grief. I thought they were hurting too and wanted to be close. I should have paid more attention to the questions Clint asked. He was a mortgage broker, always had something to say about interest rates, property values, liquid assets. I didn't mind it at first. He was making conversation, I thought. He asked once what I paid for the house back in 1989, asked how much was left on the mortgage, which had been zero for 12 years. Asked whether I'd thought about optimizing my retirement portfolio. I told him Carol and I had kept things simple. A pension, Social Security, a modest 401k I'd barely touched, and the house, which was worth considerably more now than what we paid for it. A corner lot in a neighborhood that had gone from working class to genuinely desirable over 3 decades. He nodded slowly when I told him that. The way someone nods when they've just heard something they wanted to hear. The talk of moving in started around month 4 of their regular visits. Renee framed it as concern. She said she worried about me alone in a 4-bedroom house. She said the drive from Columbus was wearing on them. Couldn't they just stay? Just for a while? Just to help? I said yes. I want to be honest about that. Nobody forced me. I said yes because she was my daughter, and because the house felt enormous and quiet in a way that had become genuinely hard to live in, and because I thought, foolishly, that having family around might help me sleep at night. They moved in on a Saturday in April. 2 cars, a moving truck, more furniture than I expected. Clint had a home office set up in the guest room by Sunday evening. Things shifted quickly. The first thing I noticed was the mail. I'd always picked it up myself, habit from 30 years of waiting on report card mailings and union newsletters. One morning the box was already empty when I got to it. I asked Renee about it. She said Clint had grabbed it, that he was going to organize things, help me stay on top of bills. I said I was perfectly capable of staying on top of my own bills. She gave me this look, patient, almost pitying, and said she knew that. They just wanted to help. I let it go. The second thing was the accounts. Clint sat me down in my own kitchen about 6 weeks after they moved in and said he'd been looking at my finances and thought we should consolidate things for easier management. He used the word we. I noticed that. He suggested I add him as a joint account holder so he could handle transfers when I didn't feel like dealing with it. He made it sound like a convenience. I should have gotten up from that table and shown him the door. Instead, I said I'd think about it. He took that as progress. What I didn't tell him was that I'd already started feeling something I couldn't quite name. A low-grade unease, like when you're driving at night and the road looks slightly wrong, but you can't say why. I called my old friend Phil. We'd been friends since graduate school. He'd been a CPA before he retired, and I described the conversation. Phil was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Lester, don't sign anything. I didn't. But Clint was patient. He tried a different approach the following week. He had documents drawn up, a durable power of attorney, he said, just a precaution in case I became incapacitated. Standard stuff, he said. All families did it. He slid the papers across the table like they were nothing. I looked at them. I'm a history teacher. I've read enough about how ordinary-seeming documents become weapons. I told him I wanted my own attorney to look at them first. His face didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. Just for a second. Of course, he said. No rush. I called Phil again that night from my bedroom with the door locked. He recommended a probate attorney named Dwight Sharp, experienced, based in Dayton. I made the appointment the next morning from my cell phone while Clint and Renee were both out. I didn't mention it to either of them. Dwight looked at the power of attorney documents and set them down carefully. He said the language was broader than what he'd typically see in a family arrangement, that the financial access it granted was extensive, that the medical decision-making clauses were written in a way that could, under certain circumstances, allow the holder to make placement decisions on my behalf, including placement in a care facility without requiring a second opinion. I sat with that for a moment. Without requiring a second opinion, I repeated. Dwight nodded. I thought about the way Clint had asked about my portfolio, about the house value, about how much was left on the mortgage. I asked Dwight what he recommended. He said the first step was to make sure my existing will was properly structured and that I had independent legal representation on record. He also said, and he said this gently, that if I had concerns about people in my household, I should document things, dates, conversations, anything that felt off. Keep a journal. Keep it somewhere they couldn't access. I started that night. An old composition notebook, the kind I used to hand out to students. I kept it inside the false bottom of a lockbox in my closet, behind Carol's winter coats that nobody touched. Over the next 2 months, I filled half of that notebook. The patterns became clearer as I started writing them down. Clint controlled all incoming mail. He had started forwarding my bank statements to an email address I didn't recognize. I only discovered this when I called my bank directly and asked them to walk me through the account settings. He had tried, twice, to add himself as a beneficiary on my 401k. The plan administrator had flagged it and put a hold on both requests because I hadn't submitted the change in person. I didn't know about the attempts until I called to ask. Renee, for her part, had started managing my medications. I wasn't on anything complicated. Blood pressure pills, a low-dose statin, a baby aspirin regimen my doctor had recommended. She started organizing them into a weekly pill organizer. I didn't think much of it until I started feeling unusually foggy in the mornings. Slow. Groggy in a way that didn't match my normal tiredness. I mentioned it to my doctor at a routine appointment I'd scheduled myself. I gave him the pill organizer. He tested the contents. There were 2 pills in my morning slot that weren't mine. A sedative, the kind prescribed for anxiety, and an antihistamine. Both of which, combined with my blood pressure medication, would produce exactly the kind of cognitive sluggishness I'd been experiencing. My doctor said, very calmly, that I should not take anything from that organizer again and that I should keep the organizer as evidence. I sat in the parking lot of his office for 20 minutes before I could drive. My daughter was medicating me without my knowledge or consent. I kept turning that over in my mind, trying to find another explanation. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they'd gotten my pills mixed up with something of theirs. Maybe. But I thought about the power of attorney, the broad language, the placement clause. There's a term for what they were building toward. I didn't want to say it, even in my own head. But I'd been a history teacher for 30 years, and I knew what it looked like when someone was constructing a narrative about a person being unfit to manage their own affairs. I called Phil from a gas station payphone. Yes, those still exist in Dayton, because I was suddenly not sure my cell phone was entirely private. I told him everything. The medications, the 401k attempts, the mail. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "You need to move before they do." Phil put me in touch with a friend of his, a retired detective named George, who did private consulting. George was 64, unhurried. The kind of man who communicated entirely in facts and left the emotion to you. He listened to everything I documented. He said I had enough to take to law enforcement, but that the case would be significantly stronger with a few more specific pieces: documentation of the unauthorized 401k beneficiary attempts, a pharmacy record confirming the medications hadn't been prescribed to me, and ideally, something in writing or on record from Clint or Renee themselves that showed intent. George helped me set up a small audio recorder, legal in Ohio under one-party consent, in the kitchen, where most of their planning conversations seemed to happen when they thought I was asleep or watching television upstairs. I want to say the wait was dramatic. It wasn't. It was 3 weeks of loading the dishwasher and pretending to be tired by 8 o'clock, and going upstairs and listening to nothing through the baby monitor app George had shown me how to use. Then, on a Tuesday night in November, I was in my room reading when I heard Clint's voice rise slightly. Not yelling. Clint rarely raised his voice, but sharp, focused. Renee was saying something about timing, something about waiting until after the holidays. Clint said they didn't have time to wait, that the market had shifted, and if they were going to refinance the house, they needed to be on title before the end of the first quarter. Refinance the house. Be on title. I put my book down. He said something else then, something I've replayed probably 100 times since. He said, by spring, between the VA disability, and I thought, the VA? I had no VA disability. I was never in the military. I thought maybe he had me confused with someone. And then I understood. He wasn't talking about existing benefits. He was talking about what he planned to fabricate, to claim on my behalf or in my name, with that broad power of attorney, once he had me documented as cognitively impaired. I had the recording. I waited until morning. I made coffee like always. I told them I was going to run some errands. I drove directly to Dwight's office, then to the Dayton Police Department non-emergency line, then to my bank, where I changed every account, every password, every linked email address, and removed all authorizations I had not personally set up. Then I drove home. Clint and Renee were in the living room when I walked in. Renee was on the couch with her laptop. Clint was standing by the window with his phone. They looked at me the way people look at someone who's supposed to be easy to manage. I sat down in my armchair, Carol's and my chair, the one we bought at a furniture sale in 1997. And I looked at my daughter and I said, I need you both to leave, today. Renee laughed a little, nervous. She said, Dad, what are you? I've spoken to my attorney, I said, and the police, and my bank. I looked at Clint. The recording from Tuesday is already with Dwight's office. Clint went very still. I know about the 401k attempts, I said. I know about the medications. I know about the title plan. And I know about whatever you were going to claim to the VA. I kept my voice even. I'd been a classroom teacher. I knew how to fill a room with calm authority. You have until this evening to take what you came with. If you're not gone by 6, I'll be calling the non-emergency line again, and the conversation will be different. What happened next, I didn't expect. Clint didn't argue, didn't threaten. He looked at Renee with an expression I recognized from 30 years in a classroom, the look of someone calculating whether they still had leverage. And then he walked to the bedroom, and I heard a bag unzip. Renee stayed on the couch. She was crying. Real tears, I think. Maybe the first real thing I'd seen from her in months. She said, Dad, I didn't want. He said it was just protecting the assets. He said, I looked at my daughter. I'd watched this woman come into the world. I'd driven her to every swim meet from age 7 to 17. I'd sat in the front row at her college graduation. I said, I know he said things to you. I know you let yourself believe them. But you put pills in my organizer, Renee. You did that. She didn't answer. I love you, I said. That doesn't change. But you're not staying in this house. They were gone by 4:30. The police investigation moved slowly, the way these things do. Ohio has specific statutes around elder financial exploitation. It's a felony if the value involved exceeds $1,000, which the 401k attempts certainly did. The medications were handled through a separate county health and adult protective services referral. The VA fabrication plan, because it involved intent to defraud a federal program, brought in a federal investigator at a certain point, which I had not anticipated and which made the whole thing considerably more serious for Clint. He was charged with attempted financial exploitation of an elderly person, elder abuse, and 2 counts of fraud. He took a plea deal, 4 years, eligible for parole in 2. Renee was charged as well, though her attorney successfully argued reduced culpability in the financial scheme. She received 18 months probation, mandatory counseling, and a restraining order I could request be lifted if I chose to. I have not lifted it. Bill drove up from Cincinnati the weekend after they left. We sat on the back porch with bourbon, and he didn't say much, which was exactly right. George called to check in. My doctor, who had been quietly on alert for weeks by that point, left a voicemail that said only, "Good, now take care of yourself." I changed the locks that same week, got a security system installed, hired a financial advisor, a woman named Andrea, recommended by Dwight, completely independent of anyone in my family, to review everything and make sure nothing else had been touched that I hadn't found yet. There were a few other things. Small amounts moved around in ways that were technically within the joint account rules that had existed before I'd caught it. Andrea documented all of it. Some of it was recoverable. The house is still mine, the corner lot, the garage where I'm slowly building the woodworking shop I promised myself. I go to bed at my own hour and wake up without the fog I'd gotten used to. And some mornings, I still reach for Carol's side of the bed in the half second before I'm fully awake. And that never gets easier. But I'm here for it. I'm here for all of it. People ask me sometimes, neighbors, a few old colleagues who've heard pieces of the story, whether I blame myself for letting them move in. I did for a while. I turned it over plenty of nights, the way you do. The yes I said in April, the documents I almost signed, the weeks I spent feeling foggy and thinking it was just age. But here's what I've settled on. Grief is not stupidity. Trusting your family is not naivete. What happened to me happens to people who are careful, people who are sharp, people who were never naive a day in their lives before loss changed the equation. And the people who did this knew exactly when to walk through the door. That's on them, not me. What I'll tell anyone who asks, and I mean anyone, is this: keep your own accounts. Keep your own mail. If someone in your house starts asking about your assets before they've finished unpacking their boxes, that's not family helping. That's reconnaissance. And if you ever feel like you're moving through your own life just a little slower than you used to, like the edges are soft in a way they weren't before, don't assume it's age. Check the pill organizer. I keep a composition notebook in the lockbox behind Carol's winter coats. I haven't written in it since the case closed, but I haven't moved it either. Some things you keep not because you need them anymore, but because they remind you of who you were when it mattered most. What happened to me wasn't random. Looking back, I can trace every step. The questions Clint asked about the mortgage before they'd finished unpacking, the mail disappearing from the box, the slow fog of mornings that I'd mistaken for age. Each thing followed the last, the way water follows a slope. They built a path toward a specific destination, and they were patient about it. But I've spent enough time in a classroom to know that patience isn't the same as wisdom. They were patient the way someone is patient when they think the other person isn't paying attention. I was paying attention, just not out loud. That's the thing I come back to most. I didn't confront them the moment I felt something was wrong. I wrote it down. I called Phil. I sat with Dwight. I let George walk me through what evidence would actually hold up and what was just a feeling. Feelings matter. Mine told me something was wrong long before I had proof. But feelings alone don't protect you. What protected me was the willingness to sit in discomfort long enough to think clearly, to not react when every part of me wanted to be the least dramatic person in a situation designed to make me lose control. There's something I used to tell my students about history, that the people who changed outcomes were rarely the loudest ones in the room. They were the ones who understood what was actually happening while everyone else was reacting to what appeared to be happening. I didn't expect to apply that lesson to my own kitchen at 67, but here we are. I think about Renee. I think about her more than I probably should. She was my daughter before she was his wife, and I have to believe that matters somewhere inside her, even now. But I also know that love doesn't excuse what was in that pill organizer. Grief softened me, and she let someone use that softness as a door. That's a choice she made. And choices, in my experience, have a way of circling back around, not because the universe is keeping score in any mystical sense. I don't believe in that, but because who you are in a moment of temptation tends to be who you keep being. Clint will find another door somewhere. Renee will have to decide, again, whether to open it. What I know about myself now is different from what I knew 2 years ago. I know I can sit in a chair across from my own daughter and hold firm. I know I can feel the grief and the anger and the disbelief all at once and still choose the right next step. That didn't come from being fearless. It came from being scared and doing the work anyway. The calls, the documentation, the appointments I made from parking lots because I didn't trust my own phone. None of that was heroic. It was just necessary, and I did it. Phil brought bourbon that first weekend. We sat on the back porch and he didn't say much, and that was the right call. Some things don't need commentary. Some things you just sit with until they become part of the landscape of your life. Not the whole landscape, not even the dominant feature, just one corner of it that you know is there. The woodworking shop is about halfway done. I'll finish it by fall.